Iran just announced that trials will begin this weekend for protesters arrested in the country's post-election crackdown. Now, all of this is new graphic reports that political protesters are being abused in prison. In fact, some detainees have reportedly even been beaten to death. Indiana Senator Evan Bayh now joins me. Senator Bayh, good to see you again.
Good to be with you, Carlos.
Senator Bayh, so I know that tomorrow in one of your committees you're going to offer up a fairly substantive bill about dramatically increasing the sanctions on Iran. Is now the right time to wade into this battle? Yesterday we heard former Secretary of State Colin Powell almost seem to say, hey, let's hold back, let's not get too involved in the Iranian situation for fear that they may manipulate our involvement.
I think now is exactly the right time, Carlos, and the reason for that is that the window of opportunity to actually deal with this problem is rapidly shrinking. The Iranians are moving forward as fast as they can to try and achieve a nuclear capability that would be deeply destabilizing for that region as well as the rest of the world, and present us with a dilemma of either accepting that or trying to use force to prevent that, and that's not a great alternative either. Right now, and for the next 9 to 12 months, they are very vulnerable to imports of refined petroleum. They've got a lot of oil. They don't have enough refining capacity. And if we confront them with the prospect of sanctions on the importation of refined petroleum products, that could be very damaging to their economy, which is already very weak, and perhaps, Carlos, get them to rethink their drive to achieve nuclear weapons.
But now, Senator Bayh, could that have any impact here in the U.S.? We know that all these things are interconnected. Could that have any impact here on the pump, here at the gas pump, and in what is still a fairly fragile U.S. economy?
No, Carlos, none whatsoever. This does not deal with the export of oil from Iran, which, by the way, we don't buy, but it does affect the global market. This deals solely with refined petroleum products going back into Iran that helps make their economy go. The Iranians know they're very vulnerable, Carlos. They are worried about this, and that's why they are moving very rapidly to try and expand their own domestic refining capacity so that in another 9 months or a year or so, they will no longer be as vulnerable as they are today. So now is the window of opportunity for acting. If we don't, this opportunity will have passed and we'll be confronted with very difficult choices.
But, Senator Bayh, you also have within Iran of deploring the crackdown on Iranian protesters, but you have some of the most significant divisions within the ruling establishment that we've seen in decades. So sanctions have been counterproductive in the past. Why now this window of opportunity? Why not try engagement, not to legitimize whoever emerges in this Iranian government, but to do better in reducing the threat of an Iranian nuclear program?
Katrina, I think you have to do both. I'm not suggesting sanctions are an alternative to engagement. I think you need to have a straightforward, substantive conversations with the Iranians and say, look, if you are willing to give up your ambitions for nuclear weapons, here's what's in it for you in terms of your economy and your acceptance on the global stage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If, however, you don't, here's the consequence, the price that you will pay. To date, you're right, the sanctions have not been, well, some of the financial sanctions have actually increased the cost of doing business for them and have hurt them at the margins, but not enough to actually get them to change their behavior. So a straightforward answer to you, Katrina, would be there is a prospect that even these more meaningful sanctions might not work. But it's worth a try because the alternative is so much worse than achieving nuclear weapons. So you go with the sanctions at the same time, or the prospect of sanctions, if the negotiations, if the engagement is not successful.
Senator Bayh, more broadly, I want to ask you about the increased use of special ops and potentially even covert operations. I know that you're involved with our intelligence effort as well as sitting on the Armed Service Committee. Does the U.S., given these various issues we have around the globe, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, et cetera, do we need to dramatically increase our funding for special operations, and do we need to step forward in a meaningful way in terms of our covert efforts?
Well, it's one of the most successful things that we do, special ops, and obviously we can't talk about covert action, but anytime you can deal with some of these problems quietly behind the scenes, it's a lot better than having people killed in a war and that sort of thing. So we are stepping up our investment in this area, Carlos. I think going forward, we probably need to do even more. I mean, look at we had a big debate here about the F-22 fighter plane. Billions of dollars. We've been at war now in Iraq and Afghanistan for quite some time, and that weapon system has never been used in either of those two conflicts. And yet special forces, special ops that you mentioned, covert action, that is very aggressively used in the kind of conflicts we are likely to face going forward. So it's in our national security interest. It makes sense to do more of what you've suggested.
Senator Bayh, thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to having you again soon.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Katrina.
Good to see you. For more on the topics we're discussing this hour, check out our website, carloswatson.msnbc.com.